Welcome back to the Darius Gant Show. I'm your host, Darius Gant, as well as founder and CEO of Tesoro AI, where we help innovative founders and executives build and scale AI solutions and AI teams. On this podcast, we focus on cutting-edge technology, more specifically, artificial intelligence. By getting up close and personal with visionary AI founders and executives, we get real-world insights to the problems that AI is solving both in business and in our everyday lives. And we get some key insights to exactly what it takes to build a company that's based in artificial intelligence. In this episode, we sit with Nick Romano, who is the co-founder and CEO of a company by the name of Deeplite. Deeplite provides an AI-driven optimizer to make deep neural networks fast. They are specifically enabling more efficient edge computing, which is great for industries like autonomous driving, smartphones, and drone technology. The company was recently recognized as one of the top 100 AI startups by CB Insights, and they just raised a round of $6 million to help the business scale. If you or your team is considering building an AI solution, make sure you reach out to the team at Tesoro AI. We've assembled the leading experts in machine learning and data science. So whether we're talking about AI strategy, software development, staff augmentation, or data labeling, we've got a strong team that has your back. Head over to www.tesoroai.com. All right, folks, let's hop into the show and chat with Nick. Nick, welcome to the show. Sorry, I had something in my eye there.
No problem. Thank you.
Appreciate you joining us today. I want to kick things off. Let's dive right in.
Sure.
Neural network optimization, right?
That's right.
That's the focus for Deeplite. What is that?
All right. So basically, it's a focus on AI, artificial intelligence, and I'll kind of start by just describing what the challenges are. Right. So when we talk about edge AI, where we are actually doing the compute right at the device itself, whether it's an autonomous vehicle or a phone or a drone or camera, the trend is to get the AI processing out of the cloud and directly into those devices so that it's running locally right where all the data is. And the biggest challenge with AI, particularly deep learning, is that these models can be and algorithms can be very, very complicated and very large, et cetera. So they need a lot of compute power, a lot of memory. They can burn batteries if you're a battery operated device, for example. So they require a lot of power. So that's the biggest challenge. So what Deeplite does is we've got a process where we can take these deep learning models that maybe they're too big, maybe they're too slow, maybe they're consuming too much power, and we can optimize them. So we can make them smaller, faster, and more energy efficient so that you can take one of these deep neural networks that may be multi-megabyte in size and get it down to just a few kilobytes so that you can put it on a very small, low-cost, low-power processor and deploy it into the edge device so that you can run AI locally. We're all about, our tagline is AI for everyday life. We want to basically be an enabler to get AI out of the lab and into the things that we use every day.
Okay, interesting. So, as I look at a lot of the deployments of AI in the various use cases that we've gone through, folks that I've seen even on the client side, one of the things I think that people forget to do is determine upfront where the processing is going to take place. If it happens in the cloud, does it happen on the device? Does it happen on a local machine? Are you all, I guess, if someone were to say they didn't take into consideration that these neural networks need to be deployed on a device, right?
Right.
Are you all kind of able to fix that problem, or is it that a customer needs to already have an understanding where it's going to be deployed, but you can just make it a little bit more efficient?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's interesting actually, because when we're talking to customers, particularly if they're early on in their development cycle for their AI models, often we'll advocate, look, don't worry about where it's going to run at this point. Focus on training your model for accuracy, because particularly depending on the use case, for those that are not familiar with AI, accuracy is the percentage of successful decisions, right? And based off of the AI processing and the inference. So the more you train a model, the more accurate it becomes, the better it is in terms of doing what it needs to do. It's very hard to train and create a model from scratch that's really small and tight that can fit into an edge device. So to try to do all of that at once is very, very difficult. So what we typically see, even for customers that know they're going to the edge, is that, hey, let's just make sure that we've got a model that does what it's supposed to do. Like if it's detecting a person, let's make sure that it detects a person and stops the car, that sort of thing. So they'll start with large GPUs and whatever hardware they need to prove out the use case. And that's perfect, actually, because that's where a lot of our customers end up coming from. It's like, hey, we've got our model, we've trained it for accuracy, it does what it needs to do, but now I need to go from this really, really expensive and heavy and powerful hardware down to this, this Raspberry Pi on my CPU. Can you help me do that? And that's exactly where we fit in. We kind of say, all right, perfect. Keep training your model for accuracy. If it's big, that's fine. Run it through our optimization process and we'll get it into a form factor without compromising that accuracy so that you can run it on that smaller processor.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's super interesting because, thinking about like, without what you all provide, it really takes someone who understands architecture and has kind of seen a number of these, implementations of artificial intelligence, of neural networks to understand, okay, I really have to be mindful of, processing and all of those different variables so that I can make sure that, although, with this huge model, we've had a high level of accuracy, we still need it to be able to function, once it's
absolutely
deployed.
Exactly. And one of the other interesting things that we've seen, Darius, is there's kind of two scenarios at a high level. There's those that are, hey, we're coming to market with a new product, or we're coming to market with a new solution, and it's going to be AI enabled, and Deeplite, can you help us, deliver that an optimized model? But we're starting to see a lot more, even more traditional companies that are out there, and they have, for example, we're working with one company. They've created an assisted driving platform for trucks. And they retrofit, trucks and fleets to help with the speed control, for example. And these guys have thousands of these units out in the field, and now they want to move from a GPS-based speed detection to an AI-based speed detection process. So rather than relying on maps, where if you're in a construction zone, the speed limit may not be the same. Right. We want to have AI that can detect the sign, identify the speed limit at the point of where the truck is, and then slow the vehicle down. They can't replace all of that hardware that they've deployed already, right? So if they want to enable AI in their existing infrastructure, that AI needs to fit the world, not the other way around, right? So that's where we come in, right?
Yeah. So you all, to keep it very simple, enable artificial intelligence to happen, but out, on the edge, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Maybe if you could just give us a few more examples, one or two more examples of, examples of AI on the edge, right? So we can drive it home for folks.
Yeah. So let's just use an example I think people can kind of relate to. And this is, let's say you're using a drone, like a flying drone, to inspect a field of crops, for example. So, you're looking for, how pure is our field? How pure is our crop? Do we have anything going on in the field, et cetera, et cetera? So, farms are typically not very close to infrastructure like cell towers and stuff like that, right? So you run into a lot of these types of gaps, right? So, you have a drone that's flying over the field, it's capturing all of this information with its cameras. What's it doing with all of that data? Does it have to accumulate that data? Maybe send it to a base station that has to be located on the ground in order to capture all the data, so that then they can send that data to the cloud, get some decisions made. So you've got a very inefficient process, right? You've got this thing flying around, capturing data, feeding it to a base station. That data is being accumulated. Maybe potentially days might go by before that data is actually processed, and decisions can be made about what's going on in that particular field. Taking that to a different level, if we can get the AI decisioning out of the cloud, or out of that base station, we can have it locally right on that drone. So that drone can now be making decisions as it's doing its job, and it only sends data that makes sense, that's relevant. Because 99% of the information it's capturing is benign, right? So if we can localize the intelligence, we can say, hey, I found this defect here, I found this defect here, or I found this problem here. Only send that information. And you can act on that a lot more quickly. So that's one example of edge-based processing.
Yeah. So compute at the edge allows for quicker decision making.
Exactly. And I like to use the drone example because it's typically battery operated. And it needs to fly, right? So you can't have huge compute dragging off of this drone. And you can't have it run out of gas, or run out of battery power, within 30 minutes, that sort of thing, right? So you need staying power, it needs to be light, and it needs to make decisions.
Okay. So if you think about, we'll talk about artificial intelligence or building and deploying artificial intelligence solutions in general, right? What do you think is the largest challenge that the industry faces in terms of just, building these applications, these AI-enabled applications?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is the data. So when you're creating and this is, when people think about AI, they think of all this sophistication and advanced robotics and all of this amazing stuff. But when you really distill what AI does, is you're basically using algorithms to help humans make decisions faster, right? So, and a lot of the algorithms are, they're distilled to solve very specific problems. So it's kind of funny because, you can spend an inordinate amount of money creating a solution to basically mimic what a 4-year-old can do, right? It's like, hey, that's there's a person in front of this vehicle. It's sort of ironic. But where I'm going with this is, in order to get your AI to make these types of decisions, and going back to my earlier comment about accuracy, you need to be able to train your AI so that it knows what it's looking at through a camera, for example, or hearing through a hearing device, right? So it's essentially getting enough sample data, and it has to be labeled, which is a whole other concept, so that the algorithm can then process that training data and learn and get better over time. So that's usually the big hump for a new application is how can I get the data to train my model so that it does what I need it to do for my particular use case.
Okay. And I guess, have you seen, or what has been the most effective way for, let's say I'm not Google, I'm not Microsoft, I'm not an enterprise that has a ton of labeled data that I start with. If you're thinking about startups, right? What advice would you have for a startup in terms of, data collection?
Yeah, I mean, this is where, you're starting small with your use cases. It tends to be a really good idea, right? So that you can narrow the focus of what you're trying to deploy and what you're trying to create. You can get your data specifically about that particular use case. And then you can grow your solution from there. And one of the beautiful things about AI is because it can learn, you can start small. And as you actually do the work, whether it's in your lab or with an early adopter customer, by default, the AI is gathering more data because it's in the real world. So you start to augment your own, the initial data that you maybe sourced with real, actual live data from your solution. And then it just sort of goes from there. So that's really the cool part of it. And which is another reason, getting that AI to be localized with that data, you can just do that even faster and potentially even get that. And this is another thing that Deeplite's working on, is to actually enable and work with what's starting to happen and what's starting to come in the future, in the near future, is training locally as well. So you're not just deploying a model, gathering data, training it over here, and then having to update all of your AI across all your systems. Have all of that happen locally, and have there's this concept called federated learning, where if you've got 1,000 cameras, they're all learning on the fly as they do what they need to do. They can share that learning and make the whole system better.
Yeah, yeah, very
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, so it's interesting because one of the things we have conversations with our customers about on the Tesoro AI side is, when there's this initiative to, launch AI applications, right? You kind of have to decide, well, is there enough data?
yeah,
Right. And in the event that there's
exactly.
not enough data, to your point, you can augment the data to create larger data sets to train on. But,
Yeah,
it's still important to get started with that journey, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because maybe today you don't have enough data, but over time, you want to make sure you're putting the processes in place to be able to collect the data, properly
yeah,
organize it, make sure it's labeled so it's actually,
yeah,
so it's
yeah, exactly,
actually
exactly.
usable, so that you have a basis to begin to launch your AI initiatives.
Yeah,
And you say, well, we'll push it off a couple years,
yes.
and then in a couple years we have this same conversation. Well, you don't have enough data.
Well,
Right?
exactly. Well, and this is where we can start to get even philosophical about it, because I mean the quality of the data, it's really important. This is when we talk about ethical AI, for example. Where's the data coming from, and are we inadvertently introducing bias into the AI algorithms, right? So for example, if you're a financial institution, this is really important. If you're approving mortgages and loans or other things to your customers, you want to make sure that that if you're using AI to help with these decision-making processes, you need to make sure that the data that's feeding that algorithm is unbiased and is going to be impartial on the decisioning, so that if you happen to live in a certain area of the city that the algorithm thinks is unbecoming, and you don't want that to affect the decision-making process, right? So this is a really important element of the maturity of AI as it continues. Again, as I said, we're all about AI in everyday life, but in order to make it ubiquitous, you have to trust it, that it's doing what it needs to do, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'd love to get your perspective on, right? Because you have to work with companies that are leveraging
Sure.
artificial intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas a lot of folks who are in this AI space, maybe they may be a vendor, right? So the company that their client doesn't necessarily have AI, but they're bringing that capability. So there's this conversation around AI hype. You've got a ton of folks who say they have it. They may not have it. They may have, the weak AI or small, or the beginnings of AI. And then you have folks who, are the other end, let's say the big techs of the world, Facebook, Google, Netflix,
Sure.
right, where they have very, deep capabilities within AI. What I'd love to get your perspective on, though, is, where are you seeing folks who are actually implementing? Is it more so from, tech startups? Is it big tech? Is it enterprise? Do we have some small businesses that aren't tech savvy that are starting to, what's your perspective on AI adoption?
Yeah, so I think AI adoption will really become mainstream once it truly becomes ubiquitous, right? AI is at the end of the day, AI is a tool in order to deliver solutions. So what I've seen, so just to answer your question about the types of organizations that are using it, it takes a lot of resources to enable AI sort of from scratch within your organization. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies that are creating platforms and services and solutions that are targeted for specific things that then consumers, whether it's business consumers or eventually consumer consumers, can actually acquire and use that within their solution. So for example, we've been talking to this manufacturer in Asia who they're actually working with an Italian company that makes coffee like espresso makers and stuff like that. So they were talking to us about using AI for something as mundane, or at least for unless you're a coffee aficionado, as the quality of the grinding of the beans, right? So this is like you're going to see when AI really takes off and becomes everywhere, people won't even realize that it's there. It's like a semiconductor chip where, you know, at the beginning it's like, oh my God, look what we can do with this thing. And now they're in absolutely everything. Microprocessors, sensors, they're everywhere. But people don't think about it from that perspective. It just becomes part of of whatever you're using.
Yeah,
including what we're talking through right now.
Yeah, I like to, a lot of ways I like to think about it, you know, because the mantra AI as a tool is very common.
Yeah.
But the power of the tool can differ depending on what kind of tool you're talking about. So if we're talking about, you know, gunpowder, guns, right? Like that really changed the entire world, right? So some tools
It's exactly
have
right.
an ability, you know, are just natural because of what they can do, because of the changes that they can create in society, have a much larger impact. So when we say AI as a tool, some folks, AI is just a tool. Yeah, I'm like, we really got to kind of think about this. And we're at the very early phases where we haven't really seen, you know, from an implementation perspective, we haven't seen anywhere near what we'll see down the road, because a lot of folks still don't even know how to collect the data that they're going to need. Right.
That's right.
But are learning about it.
That's exactly. And you know, it's interesting, and we're starting to hear a lot more about this. You know, there was a huge push or a lot of hype around smart cities and what they can do to, you know, improve the quality of life for people in urban settings. But in order to do that, you have to just gather so much data. And if you're trying to improve a city, you're basically gathering data about the people in that city, right? So all of a sudden it's like, well, timeout. Where's this data going? How's it going to be used? Is it anonymized? Or, you know, and you get into this big challenge. So I think there's going to be this interesting time where AI, it's been advancing so fast, and now we're starting to hit real world geopolitical issues, right? And it's like the real world and AI are coming together now. It's like, now we got to figure out how to do this properly for society.
Which will be especially because I think, you know, in terms of just technology, right? Software, it's kind of build it and we'll figure out the problems later. With AI, it's kind of, that could actually, there could be some serious implications if we don't
well, exactly. I mean, it's you know, there's technology has advanced incredibly fast a lot of times because it's you know, it's spearheaded by defense related or security related issues, right? So you know, when you start to deal with something as sophisticated as artificial intelligence, you want to make sure that that we don't get too far over our skis and start creating things that are actually going to harm the world as opposed to make it better.
Yeah. So if we get back to kind of, you know, what you all are building at Deeplite, right? How do you know, start up yourself, right? Early stage. If we think about that journey to, you know, customer acquisition, you know, what does that look like going from, you know, 0 to 1, right? What does it look like? You know, what kind of paths do you have to take? Is it really, you know, relying on industry expertise and networking, or do you have to implement some other type of sales or marketing strategy?
Sure. So with our Deeplite in particular, you know, because we're a deep tech company, and we're essentially creating tools that enable other solutions to come to market from an AI perspective, we have a tremendous amount of research that's part of what we do. So we're creating IP. We've got novel capabilities, you know, the ability to take a very, very large, complicated deep neural network and very, very quickly converge on a smaller version, optimized version of that model, which is a very large and complex thing to do. You know, requires a lot of research and IP. So for us, you know, for our path, you know, we needed to raise funding, which we did and are doing, to fund that initial research so that we could get the core kernels of the IP that we're creating and start to build the commercial platform around that. That was we had to go through all of these steps before we could commercialize. And, you know, we did that over about, for for what we were doing, actually in pretty record time, actually, I think, you know, it's like basically an 18-month window before we commercialized our first version last year. So yeah, and if somebody's looking to try to replicate that, you need to be able to get to plan out what you need to get to a commercial state, and then even then, you know, your commercial ramp is only going to go so fast, particularly at the beginning. So you got to get to the point where there's a decision point to say, all right, we're not commercialized yet, but we need to now start to invest beyond R&D into sales and marketing and business development and all of those sorts of things. So there's a process to follow of going through this research path, commercialization path, launch path, and then growth. From that perspective. And we're not even done. Like we're in market with our first platform, which is the optimizer, but we're coming to market with some really interesting things later this year that will affect the actual inference within the edge device itself. So we're continuing the R&D path while we grow the commercial side of our business.
Okay. And so if you think about kind of actually developing that first version of the product, the optimizer, what kind of talent did that require up front?
Yeah, well, I mean, our team is mostly PhDs and master's level type of students, or not students, but graduates.
They were students.
And yeah, they were students. Yeah, exactly. So, excuse me, when you talk about AI in particular, and this is another challenge that kind of goes a bit overlooked in the AI space, it's the search for talent. The talent's a premium. So it's very important to, from a company perspective, to have a culture that attracts really bright people, keeps really bright people, and keeps them motivated, doing really cool things. Because it's particularly on the research side of AI and coming up with this type of technology, you need to have that kind of brain power to help you commercialize and come to market with this type of IP. There's other types of AI solutions though that are more on the they're productizing solutions for manufacturing and whatnot. That is a little bit different because there's a little bit more. That's a bit more of an engineering exercise where you can leverage pre-existing IP that other people have developed. And this is what's exciting about what we're doing is we're kind of bridging that gap to say, hey, here's all the AI that's happening in the lab. Here's the commercial applications for it. How can we get the AI that's in the lab into a form factor that can be deployed into these other solutions? So we're selling to the researchers, but we're also selling to the AI providers that are creating solutions for other customers like robotics and camera systems and things of that nature.
Yeah. So, and what you mentioned is interesting in regards to talent coming at a premium. I always think about, look, when you don't have an unlimited budget to bring on folks who are, PhDs or have a master's, right? There has to be something that allows you to recruit that type of talent. And even if it's not on one, recruit it, but if it's not on a full-time basis, right? Then how do you still get access to that brain power in order to help you to develop the solutions that you needed to build out, right? And then just thinking about, well, look, if we need to bring on folks who are heavily research driven, then in terms of what our product roadmap is, if we're going to hire this person full time, understanding that burn is something we have to think about as a startup, do we need this person full-time permanently, or do we need them full-time temporarily where they can come in as a consultant, and then once we have the heavy lift taken care of, we can bring in some other folks who can kind of do the basic blocking and tackling. Did you all have to deal with that, or are currently kind of working through those types of things?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into attracting talent. And there's a lot of it's multidimensional. So it's not just money, and it's not just ownership either, and equity and stuff like that. Although those are factors, obviously. What's really kind of cool about particularly those that are research that have sort of lean towards the research side. there's a strong motivation to actually just do things that are very, very interesting. So there's gratification that just comes from the work itself. Not to say that that's not applicable in other types of jobs, of course, obviously as well. But in particular, what I found is the quality of the work is as important as the compensation that goes with it, right? And feeling like you're making a difference. But to your point, though, Darius, there is a really, and we do this is a very important cultural thing at Deeplite, that particularly if you're research intensive for the work that you're doing, is not having this sort of firewall between research and engineering. Like particularly early on when you're a smaller team, you need to not only, when you talk about talent being a premium, not only do you have to find really, really smart people that can come up with the IP, but they also need to have the ability to think about how that actually gets practically deployed. So you need people with software skills as well as just the pure algorithm research skills, et cetera. So the early on, it's really good to have those types of hybrids, that talent that can sort of design and deliver solutions early on. This way, you can optimize the limited resources that you have to come to market. AI is really much like a lot of other things. When you're looking to commercialize, there's so many paths you can go as well. So you also need a very, very strong roadmap in terms of where you think you need to go as a product, but you have to be nimble enough to react if you've maybe made some poor, or maybe decisions that need to be course corrected a little bit, which when you're researching, that's kind of hard to do if you're going down this one path and all of a sudden you kind of hit a wall and you're like, okay, well, now we got to go this way. So it's, look, it's challenging, and it's really about optimizing all of that and trying to do it with, early on, probably not a lot of money to make that happen, right? Just
oh yeah, sorry, I was on mute there.
No problem. Yeah, no problem.
But yeah, one of the interesting insights that I took away, just having been in contact with a lot of folks who are more senior in their career within AI. So like these folks who are PhDs, master students, or maybe they just have a lot of experience in industry. It's kind of like on the startup level, you have this idea of what needs to be built. You go out and, everyone is attracted to this idea, here's the big dream, right? Everyone sells the big dream. And great, like we're going to accomplish that one day. But, there's always these little steps in between. And so, one of the challenges that I understood having these conversations with these folks is, they come in and there's this roadmap where they need to knock out A, B, and C. But the gap between C and D, there's many steps between that don't require, right, someone of that level. So they kind of end up going back and doing some I don't want to call it lower level work, but work that, someone who is much more junior in their career could do. And so, but the reason it was so interesting to me, because I always thought, like, when someone left to go to big tech, right, or recruited, I thought it was like a money thing. Right. But it wasn't always a money thing. It was actually, to your point, what am I actually doing on a day-to-day basis? And the folks on the startup side who kind of figure out, okay, how do we keep people highly engaged? Right. Those are the ones who had less, retention challenges with retaining top talent. So it's just an interesting exercise because it goes beyond, or interesting thought because it goes beyond just, let's find great people and bring them into organizations. Also, let's retain.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I guess, from our perspective at Deeplite, personally, I feel again, I like to, it's kind of like the semiconductor world with Moore's law, and you're always trying to make the chip smaller, more powerful. It's kind of the same thing for us with AI. So, as we continue to commercialize our platforms and roll them out, there's this constant innovation drive for us to, can we make them smaller? Can we make them faster? And that challenge really never goes away in terms of that efficiency. And then, of course, there's a whole other class of model types Like right now, we focus primarily on computer vision, CNN type models. There's all kinds of other AI innovations that are coming to market that, you know, are just as applicable for what we do, but will require a whole other class of innovation to make those types of models work as well.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting thought experiments to go through. I'm going to switch it up a little bit because I know we got to be conscious of time here. But two quick fire questions. What is your favorite tech tool to use inside of Deeplite?
My favorite tech tool? Probably PyTorch. It's the framework that we started with. It's a very flexible AI framework for us, and we've had a tremendous amount of success with our Neutrino platform built on top of that framework. Not to take anything away from TensorFlow, and that is a framework as well. But if you asked me to pick one, that was the one.
Okay. No, we'll go with PyTorch. We'll go with PyTorch. And who is someone who's inspired you either in AI or in business?
That would have to be my dad. So my dad was an entrepreneur himself his entire life. From a little kid on, I watched a completely different business, not in tech, but just an entrepreneur. You know, kind of watched him go through the motions, running a business. You know, managing people, delivering solutions, making customers happy, all that sort of thing. It was foundational for me. And I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. Like Deeplite's my fourth startup that I've been part of.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have the luxury of having a parent who was an entrepreneur. But I always think you know, if you have that exposure at a young age, you see a different world than kind of, you know, being an employee is a great option, but then there's this other world where, you know, you're an employer or you're an entrepreneur, right? And you have these other things that you need to think about as an entrepreneur, and just to open up that pathway. Because, you know, for me, I remember coming out of college, I'm like, oh, I'm not the entrepreneur type. You know, I was telling a good friend, and he's like, yeah. I mean, I think he knew my personality, but I didn't know enough to see it yet. He's like, talk to me again after you, because, you know, I got my CPA and went into accounting as an auditor. He was like, we'll talk again in a year.
It's exactly right. No, you know what? But I will tell you, as much as I had the bug from a young age that I wanted to do something, and I think getting that early experience in industry, working for other people, even big company experience is good stuff. I mean, you just get that exposure. Particularly, you know, my first job was in a railroad in their IT department. But you start to, if you can appreciate how the inner workings of the enterprise is like. You know, Deeplite obviously has a B2B component to it, but some of my other companies beforehand were very enterprise targeted in terms of who we sold into. If you can appreciate how these organizations actually work and operate, it just helps you as an entrepreneur sell into them as well, because you can appreciate the challenges and basically the pathways to get to successful deals and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that was kind of enlightening to me, it's like, you know, when you are working as a professional, as an employee, right, you kind of have a defined set of things that are laid out that you need to tackle, unless you work at a startup.
Exactly. Yeah.
But as an entrepreneur, it's kind of, well, there's a number of things you can be doing, but the core always revolves around, well, what's going to be valuable to my customer. Right.
That's exactly right.
And I know not everyone probably thinks about that.
Well, look, I mean, not every company is a VC fundable company, right? There's lots of really, really successful businesses that people have created that have had to do it the old-fashioned way, which is, you know, the best way to raise money is to get revenue from customers, right? So, you know, you just got to start thinking about that from day one, as opposed to saying, all right, well, I'm going to go raise a couple $1 million and I'll worry about revenue, you know, 24 months from now, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, this is great, man. I'm glad we were able to have this conversation. I appreciate you taking some time. For folks that want to check out Deeplite, you know, and learn more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, definitely. www.deeplite.ai is our website. Nick at deeplite.ai is my email. Just ping me. I'd be happy to chat with anybody about their AI needs, or entrepreneurship in general, or anything you want to talk about. So it's been a great pleasure talking to you today, and I really appreciate you reaching out, and look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to follow up with you for an update soon here.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Nick.